Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for the City of Franklin for Thursday, May 12th, 2022. We will call the meeting to order with a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Here, sir.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Here.
And the chair votes present. Let the record show that Alderman Baggett is not present at this time. Let's go to item 1, which is approval of the minutes for April 13th and April 14th. I'll entertain a motion if there's no questions or comments on those.
Move for approval.
Proper motions are a second.
Second?
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to that. Let's go to new business then. Item 2, consideration of draft ordinance 2022-11, an ordinance to amend the budget of the City of Franklin for fiscal year 2021-2022. Christine, you got that?
This will be me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we spend the majority of this meeting on the new budget for fiscal '23, we do need to talk about where we have action requested for the budget for fiscal '22 for this fiscal year that is ending June 30th at the end of next month. And before I jump into just a couple of slides that have some detail, just want to give just a little preamble that the state of Tennessee requires that all budget amendments must be in place by June 30th. However, we do not know all of our revenues until the end of August. We actually have 2 more months of sales tax information that we receive after the fiscal year ends. And of course, we continue to pay bills because we are operating until the end of June, and we receive invoices, bills to be paid primarily during the month of July. So this is our best estimate. It's a little conservative because we cannot exceed appropriations for expenses. That is something that we're not allowed to do. So it's a little conservative. But what we do is we do have what we call this a cleanup budget ordinance amendment. And then our comptroller, Mike Lowe, when the books are closed and all the bills are paid, we know what the revenues are, Mike Lowe comes back and usually in the September timeframe and describes to this committee how we finish the year. So that's where you'll actually know how we closed out June 30th, but it does take about 90 days from the close of the year to be able to have all that pulled together to get ready for, of course, the auditors to come in here and do their work. So this is the beginning of the closeout effort for fiscal year 22. If we could go to the next slide, we'll give us. We're going to talk about just a couple of things in this amendment. While there's lots of ins and outs, it is a cleanup with budget balancing actions. And then some of the things that we do at the end is for year-end accounting and cash balance contingencies. Thank you. The first thing that we're going to do with this cleanup ordinance is we're going to be adjusting revenues. And some of this is resulting from additional revenues that have been incurred above the budget amounts thus far for fiscal year 22. That is primarily local option sales taxes, and our comptroller has been describing every month along the way the sales taxes we have received versus budget, and we have been up, of course, significantly this year. We also have additions in state shared sales taxes, which is a result of the state collecting more sales taxes than they had given us original guidance, as well as business tax collections. The reductions are primarily, the major reduction is that we have more guidance. We had the final guidance on how we are to account for the American Rescue Plan grant program. When we started this fiscal year, we had the guidance, the interim guidance that we were to go ahead and record that into the general fund. That has changed. And of course, we do have allowable uses in general fund, but also in hotel motel tax and water and sewer fund. And so we are making those cleanup items here at the end. So the final guidance on the American Rescue Plan, the direct appropriation, is that those funds are to be recorded directly in the funds that those expenses are allowable for. If we can go on to the next slide. On the expense side, we we're going to be looking at a significant increase because we do have additional revenues, but most of this is getting us in shape for getting ready actually to begin fiscal year '23, as well as to cash fund capital projects, and also to shore up our closed pension fund. This board has had a history of putting additional funding into the closed pension at the end of the year when there have been funds available. It's actually been a very appreciated practice, and we are proposing to put $1.5 million additional into that closed pension. Most of that funding will go toward actually paying a portion of that closed pension plan that's called the cash balance plan. We have employees who were hired before 2001 who there was an aspect of that plan that they have cash balance accounts that are allocated to their name. Those folks are retiring, and when they retire, they either pull that out and roll that into some other retirement program, or they annuitize it. But they do act upon it at retirement, and a number of those folks are retiring. They've retired in the last couple of years, and we'll have some more of those in the next few years. We are also putting additional money into our street aid fund for paving, and the largest, in addition to capital projects that we have in this increase, is the establishment of a capital vehicle fund, and this is for something the city administrator has talked, I believe, a couple of times in public meetings. But we're going to actually establish a capital vehicle replacement fund that will be. We will be going into a program that we replace vehicles, the recommendation of the fleet manager, and that she evaluates the vehicles citywide, and she recommends to the city administrator what should be replaced based on criteria. And so this will establish that fund for accounting purposes. You've already allowed by resolution for some of these pieces to be ordered. Many of them will take quite a while to get here, but we have been moving forward with that program. So we will establish that fund with this budget amendment. The major decreases are also related to accounting cleanup on the American Rescue Plan. There's also a reduction for projects that did not occur this year in the Traffic Operations Center, and that's always something that we placed in budgets, but that works in conjunction with the state. If things don't happen, then we don't need to use that funding, and but the funding's in place in case the state wants to do that, as well as we have some budget reductions simply because we had quite a few vacancies or weren't able to receive supplies that we had anticipated ordering.
Christine, before you get off of that, I want to make sure I understand. The other night when we had the question on the retirees, I thought we were putting $5.1 million into the closed, but
this is an additional 1.5 million
to what we had budgeted, which is 3.6.
The actuarial requirement for fiscal '22 in the closed plan was 5.1, but what we are asking to do here is, because we did have additional revenues, put an additional $1.5 million into that closed plan. And that was something that even fiscal year '21, this board put some additional funding into the closed plan at the end of the year. So we're actually putting additional funding than we are required to put in. Some of that is certainly the volatility this year in the investments, and having advanced funding in the middle of the year can help with that 12/31 number. Looks like for 12/31/22, but it is a recommendation to put an additional funding into shoring up that closed pension plan.
So are we putting 6.6 then?
Yes, we put an additional 1.5 million.
1.5 million.
I'll have a graphic for you when I
Never mind.
present that shows
Let's go into
the
that.
last 20 years of funding.
And then we do have a few other items in the cleanup for some other funds that you have heard about some of these. The sanitation fund, we actually later this week will be doing the major rehab to the transfer station floor that you heard about, that there was an imminent need to fix that floor. And that is a transfer to the sanitation fund. The road impact fund, there's a $392,000 transfer to the capital projects fund for a capital improvement project. The county facilities, there's also a transfer related to the city's portion of the Franklin Special School District project. And that is a project, while we are conducting that with the school district, we do have to pay for our half of that project. And we do have a long-term agreement with the school district that allows us use of that project, of those fields, once for the times when the school doesn't need to use it. We also have several cleanup items in the hotel motel tax. One piece of good news was that hotel motel revenue collections, they rebounded this fiscal year, maybe quicker than we might have originally thought. Certainly last spring was just not a good time in the tourism industry, but this year, this fiscal year has been strong. We are adjusting those revenue estimates. We are adjusting some of our appropriations related to capital projects, and we also, this is a fund that we're doing some American Rescue Plan projects, or we had some eligibility in this area that is tourism related, and we are recording American Rescue Plan dollars to the Hotel Motel Fund. We also, in Parkland dedication, are transferring funds for work on the Liberty Park improvements. And then for the transit fund, we also have a budgeted transfer of $750,000. Let's see, I believe that meant to be a sanitation fund. But sanitation fund is, while it does have its own revenue source, it's one that does not have significant reserves, and we do have state requirements for June 30th balances that all of our funds are positive. They actually have a couple of months of revenues that are held in that fund. And due to the timing, we usually ask for approval to move general fund monies into sanitation if necessary, once all the bills are paid. As you know, as you could be quite well aware, there's always some unanticipated bills with sanitation that want a fund that's very tight. For example, a significant repair on a garbage truck. Those are the types of things that could happen in June that we don't know about right now. So we give ourselves the authorization, but we only move general fund into the sanitation fund when it's necessary. So primarily, the sanitation fund operates off of its own revenues, but this will allow us to keep that fund in compliance with the state if we do need to move funds in the end. Are there any questions about the year-end cleanup?
Any questions from the committee? I guess it's appropriate to let the minutes show that Alderman Baggett is with us now. He has joined us. All right, if not, let's go to item 2. Oh, I'm sorry.
If we may ask for this to be moved to the full board.
We do need that. I'll entertain a motion to that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion for approval.
And to the full board for
And,
review and approval.
yes.
Proper motion, is there a second?
Second.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, let's go to item 3 then. Consideration of draft ordinance 2022-12, an ordinance of the City of Franklin, Tennessee, adopting a budget for the fiscal year 2022-2023, providing an effective date. Eric, you're up.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to present to you the recommended fiscal year 23 budget. I'll take probably the next half hour or so to walk through that with you. It is a 470-page document, so I'm not going to go through every page.
Oh,
Thank goodness. But I will take you through the key highlights and walk you through that, and then if there are questions, feel free to stop me along the way, or we can talk through it at the end. Ultimately, our request tonight or this afternoon would be to move these items onto the full board. I think as I shared with some of you individually, my plan is out of respect for the fact that we have 4 new board members, I am going to place this on the work session as well on the 24th to just provide a little extra time to talk through any questions folks may have and give a shortened overview, but an overview of what this proposed budget is. So you'll see it again there, and first reading will happen that same night. Our responsibility is to get that budget adopted and in place before July 1 when the new fiscal year starts. So we have plenty of time to do that, and look forward to engaging you and the rest of the board in that process. All right, so let's jump in. What I'll talk about today is our overall focus that guides what we do with this budget, but also overall management of our city operations, provided a general budget overview, hit our primary operating fund, the general fund, and hit the key elements there, give you some highlights of our other operating and capital project funds, and then ultimately summarize where we are and go from there and answer any questions you have. This is a kind of 3-pillar statement that we've used for some time. I think we first developed it when we went to pursue our second AAA bond rating in New York, probably 12 years ago. But it stands true still today, the fact that we rely on these 3 pillars. Strong management, that we run our operations well, we have good processes in place, we focus on high quality service delivery, benchmarking our success and our work against other communities across the state and across the nation, that we have good capital investment project oversight, and we are focused on delivery of those key projects. Community development, that we strive for high standards and high quality development that will sustain a growing, vibrant local economy. The last bullet talks about something that we get to play offense. We go out there and build a strong, competitive community, and we have the resources and planning to help us do that. And of course, the third and most foundational pillar is we have a strong financial base. Good long-term planning. We look to see that we can sustain our operations over the long haul. Multi-year financial planning, strong reserves, meet the requirements that give us those highest bond ratings from both Standard & Poor's and Moody's, which puts us in the very upper echelon of cities across the country, and that we support the needs of our community. All right, so the overview, these are 4 very simple but important bullets. We maintain high-quality services. We preserve the capacity to respond to future needs and meet the quality of life expectations of our community, that we invest in and plan for the future, and that we are constantly striving to be a highly competitive community, a place that people want to live in, want to raise their families, want to build their businesses. All right, here are the big picture top line numbers. Our overall budget, all funds, is $207.1 million. That is a 15% increase over where the budget stands today. That is a significant increase, but I will tell you the primary story there is we've got a substantial amount of planned draw on reserves to deliver capital projects. One of the things you saw when we talked about our financial model to support the capital investment program is that we rely on cash to help us get those projects done. Somewhere in the neighborhood of almost 60% of that CIP is supported with pay-as-you-go resources, and this is reflective of that. This is a planned use of reserves to deliver capital projects in excess of $20 million within that 207. The general fund itself, our primary operating fund, is just under $95 million, $94.9 million, and that represents a 2% increase over the budget we have today. So let's walk through overall highlights of the budget. It is a balanced budget. It fully complies with your policies. We meet the budget goals that were established at the beginning of this process as well. Essential services are maintained and enhanced through this budget. Our property tax remains the same, at $32.32, 0.3261 cents per $100 of assessed valuation, which is one of the very lowest in the state of Tennessee and nationally when we compare ourselves against other cities. There are some significant increases in key focus staff areas, 13 new positions and 1 restored position in the general fund. There are 2 positions restored in the water management fund, 2 new positions in sanitation. Let me give you a quick overview of some of the positions in the general fund. We have them all listed here because we think they're all important and touch on key things, but public safety with 4 new police officers targeted for our operations or patrol segment. The fire information systems analyst adds a high-tech analyst to our fire team, but it also will have the end result of putting an additional firefighter back on shift because that function is being provided right now by a firefighter. We'll add a paralegal that'll assist us, especially in capital project delivery, obtaining right-of-way and easements. Capital project inspector to help us more efficiently deliver projects. An HR benefits generalist, an organizational development specialist, help us support and build the strongest team we can. An assistant preservation planners, we see that workload continue to expand as we maintain our 7 historic districts and that key element of our community. Assistant turf supervisor in parks, and we restore a building inspector in building and neighborhood services. As I said, 2 new positions in sanitation, that's reflective of the growth in the community and the service demands of providing that service every week to our residential customers. And then 2 restored operator positions in water management. We had frozen or held some positions back to 2 years ago when COVID first hit us and the uncertainty around that, and we have, in a targeted way, restored positions, and these are the last 2 that have been held in water management. These next 2 bullets, and I'll go into this in greater detail later, but one of the headline items in this budget, and in my mind, and I told you this a couple months ago, the number 1 budget goal is to update our compensation plan. We were due to have that done 2 years ago when COVID kicked in. In fact, we had already started that process, and we all know the uncertainty that hit us that spring, early that spring, and at that point, we had to put it on hold. A year later, things were still pretty uncertain and disruptive, and we really didn't have the kind of numbers we needed to do an update of the plan. But here we are, 2 years later, 5 years since we last did a comprehensive review, ready to move forward. We did do, and the board acted, and we're very appreciative of this, in late December of 21, leading into January 2022, what we called a down payment. We did do some adjustments of pay grades, all of them at 5%, and we would recommend that we do an additional 5% this July, bringing that total to a 10% increase over all of our pay grades from where we were a year ago. And then the position-by-position review that's part of this review adjusted 70% of our positions and 79% of the individual team members or employees.
That's the difference between a position and a team member.
Yeah, so, we have a firefighter position and there's 100 of them. And that's 1 position, but there are 100 firefighters or something, that sort of thing. So
Okay.
it gets at the idea that there are multiple people in 1 position. So the position is just the count of positions. The number of team members is the number of people that are in those various positions, if that makes sense. And those have gone up either 1 or 2 pay grades. We do maintain a general pay increase of 5% as a recognition of what all is going on in the market, and also as a companion to the pay plan implementation. And then we do include what we've done for several years is a performance-based pay increase of up to an additional 2.5% based on the most recent performance evaluation. And then an added element this year, again, recognizing some of the burdens that strong inflation has caused us, the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years, is an additional $1,000 pay increase for all employees under $90,000 in annual salary.
And how many was that?
That is, I don't have the exact
Approximately.
number, I'll have to get you, but it is a vast majority of our team
Well,
members.
I know that. but
Yeah,
meant,
I'll have to get you that exact number. I
is
should
it
have that for you.
700, or is it? I know that. I'm
We'll
just
get you
saying.
the exact number, but we can get you that. It's a well over half of
Okay.
our folks. I'll give you the exact number there.
Thanks.
And that's a recognition too that especially some of our lower pay grades are absorbing higher costs because they have to live farther away because of housing costs. And so this is somewhat of a recognition to provide some additional support there. And obviously, if you have a higher pay, a percentage increase gives you more dollars than if you're at a lower base pay. So this also maybe helps address that as well. We do have the first increase in health insurance premiums in 2 years. We're estimating around 5%. We'll get the exact number here in the next week or so, but it won't exceed 5%. That's the planning number at this point. As Christine referenced in the amendments you just talked about, we are establishing a separate vehicle replacement fund. And so that will, we think, bring a better, more consistent updating of our vehicles at the right time to be as efficient as we can. And then we have various other capital needs in terms of operating capital, equipment replacements, and technology enhancements totaling just over $3 million. Yeah.
I don't see the 3% on this slide.
Yeah, we'll talk about
Oh,
that a
sorry.
little more when we talk about the pay plan. That is part of it. Yes, that will be
Got
part
it.
of the implementation of the pay grade adjustments. So,
Separate.
yeah, it is a companion. We'll talk about that in just a little bit.
Hey, Eric,
Yes, sir.
because I know we're going through a lot, I don't know when to, drop in a couple
Yeah.
of questions. But on the second bullet point right there, regarding the capital vehicle equipment replacement fund, Christine had just mentioned what the initial amount was going to be. How did we determine that? Because I remember when we were going through review, how large of a fleet we were really talking about.
Well, we have a projected cost of, or a number of around 50 vehicles that will need to be replaced right now. There is some backlog because of the delays that we've seen in delivering vehicles.
Okay.
It is looking at, we're going to determine exactly what an annual number is, and that'll probably stabilize as we do this better. We believe that's well over what any given year will require us.
Okay.
And it gives us that base to have that in place, that we'll be able to respond to whatever need we have in a given year. I think if we did that just independently this year, it's somewhere in the $2 million range. So I think we're well within that.
And even though we are playing catch-up, just the cost, we've had years where we needed to put $1 million to replace police vehicles. So that the magnitude there will be a magnitude even after we catch up, but this is about a 2 fiscal year catch-up.
Okay.
And we are doing a transfer from the general fund for $1 million for vehicle, police cruiser replacement. It's about 21 police cruisers. They're SUVs.
Thank you.
The one fee increase that is included in this budget is an adjustment to your sanitation for residential trash and recycling services, moving it up $1.50 from $20.50 to $22 per month. That, of course, covers everything: trash, recycling, the white goods, the yard waste bags, other loose yard waste, all of that together. We do also include a funding for the 5-year update of the Envision Franklin Land Use Plan. That's come up a couple times in recent meetings, and this is what we had anticipated, and we have additional support in the budget to help us with some additional consultant outside resources to help us with that. Of course, we continue to measure what we do, not just what we spend, but what we get from it. And we have measurables within this budget throughout and within every department. We connect it to our strategic plan, Franklin Forward. We connect it to sustainability and performance measures. We compare ourselves against other benchmarks within the state of Tennessee as well. All right, so let's jump in on the general fund. Next couple pie charts give you a sense of, first, where the money comes from, and then the next two where we spend it. We continue to be very dependent on local option sales tax, just under 59%. And we'll talk a little more detail on that. We've seen significant growth in that over the last couple years, and we'll break that down in just a little bit. State shared tax, which is essentially sales tax collected at the state level and then some of it remitted back to cities on a per capita basis. Our property tax component, this is the property tax that remains after we pay our debt service. The balance goes into funding general fund operations. And then we've got various other smaller revenue sources, but important: alcohol tax, permits and licenses, franchise fees, grant dollars, et cetera. Now, looked at another way, when you say what fits in the broader context of what you'd call consumption taxes, over 80%. Excuse me. That is a number that has grown. It was just a couple years ago around 75%. As we've seen the growth that we've had in sales tax, we see that materialize here. That is the nature of our revenue structure. It is also why we carry a higher level of reserves than most cities do, because consumption taxes can change on you quickly. We saw that in the pandemic. We saw that very much so in the Great Recession. We had 30-plus months of consecutive sales tax decline starting in 2008. So, our reserves saw us through that. Our reserves in that case helped us absorb those blows and continue services, not lay off people and still be ready, because we knew when the recession ended, we'd be one of the first cities to have growth and have demands on services, and we didn't want to have to go back out and fill our roster with talented people. Let's keep them on board, keep them ready, and that has supported us well. So where do we spend it? This is by function. By far, public safety is the primary funding area that we put our investment in, the general fund at just under 43%. And it's more than twice any other element. You see, of course, Public Works, our community and economic development pieces, and then the sort of governance and finance and administration pieces all below 10%. When you look at the actual expense category, our personnel costs are attributable for about 72% of our overall expenditures. We are definitely in the people business. That's how we deliver the bulk of our services, is through our staff. And so their wages and benefits account for the lion's share of this budget. Our operations component, which is supplies, materials, contracts that we need to support those services, at about 25%. And then the capital equipment right around 3%. All right, so this is the biggie. As I said, the number one goal by far was to implement the compensation plan. The next two slides have a lot of bullets, but I'm going to walk through them, and this gives you a sense and gives our team a sense of how we're going to implement it. Again, this is the first comprehensive update of the pay plan in 5 years. The board did do a down payment in late December of 2021, taking two actions. First, moving all the pay grades 5%, and then providing an across-the-board pay adjustment to all of our city team members of 2.5%. So that's already happened. We knew that that would be part of making progress. We had already seen the inflationary pressures happening and wanted to take that action early to show our commitment, and I think it was smart. It helped us get that in place early and showed our commitment to our team members as well. We have a compensation consultant work with us, with HR, with department leadership, myself and the assistant city administrators. We review every position. We identify a market value for each position based on a value from private sector comps, where there are private sector comps, and then a cross-section of cities, close to 20 different cities across the state and that have similar characteristics to Franklin. And collectively, we want to be in the top quartile of those numbers. And so that's where we anchor the midpoint of those pay grades for each job. That's how we decide what pay grade they go into. So we use that same methodology. That's the methodology we used 5 years ago when we did the update. It's the methodology we used almost 9 years ago when we put the pay plan in place. I'm not sure why I lost my screen.
Dimming before it.
I don't know. Can you help me with that, Casey?
Possibly.
If you can pull this up
Perfect.
on
Yeah.
yours,
I should be able
and I'm on slide 17. I think I'm on slide 17. I'm actually on slide 15, sorry.
to. Math is hard.
Yeah, well, I accidentally clicked on 17.
Let's see if I can get this to.
Eric, as that comes up, I had a quick question. If you talk about being in that top.
Put it on the presentation at the very bottom, the little screen. Perfect. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have my mic on either. I was just looking at this. When you talk about being in that 75% percentile location, that's nationally, right? Or is
It's a
that within the
combination
state?
of that private sector number, which is a broad-based private sector number,
Okay.
and then the other is the cross-section of cities, largely Tennessee cities.
Okay.
So it is a blend,
Okay.
but it's more regional than it is a national number.
Regional.
So, because
Okay.
we want to have that focus, because that's largely what we're competing against when we are recruiting and attracting folks.
Okay.
So, all right, so, like I said, first time we've done this in 5 years. When we went through it, of the city's 275 positions, of which approximately 750 are filled with 750 employees, 187 or 68% had a 1 or 2 pay grade adjustment based on those market numbers. When you look at that in terms of just the individual team members, 594 have 1 or more, 1 or 2 pay grade adjustments, 79% of our full-time employees. And I think pretty telling, our 2 lowest pay grades have essentially been eliminated. Pay grades B and C. It's an alphabetical pay grade designation working its way up. B and C essentially have all been moved into D or E in terms of a pay grade level based on the market numbers. And that is reflective of some of what we've seen in the recruiting and retention elements we've dealt with in the last couple years. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's how we're going to implement it. And it's kind of approximately a 5-step process from here. We will adopt the pay grade adjustment. Again, we did 5% end of December. We'll do a second 5% effective July 1, or the first full pay period, or first pay period in July. Anybody who is below the minimum of the pay grade, because we moved the pay grade or whatever may have happened, we'll make sure everybody's up to a minimum. So that's the first step. Then we will go through and provide basically a market or cost of living adjustment for all team members at 5%. So that's the next step. Again, the 2.5% had been provided at the end of December, another 5% here. And then the merit-based increase of up to 2.5% based on performance that folks can receive there based on their most recent performance evaluation. And then this is the piece Alderman Baggett was referring to. For those that had pay grade adjustments, we will provide an additional 3% adjustment for folks whose pay grade moved, 3% for each pay grade. So if you moved 1 pay grade, an additional 3% adjustment. If you moved 2, it would be a 6% pay grade related adjustment. And then finally, an additional $1,000 pay increase for all folks that are making less than $90,000. That is a pay increase. That's not a bonus. Last year we did a bonus in July. This year we're doing added to the base. You may ask how we got to 90,000. We kind of approached it a couple different ways. One was we looked at a regional number for a family of 4, and the 80% of the regional number for a family of 4 took us in the upper 80s, around $88,000, $89,000 a year. So that was one data point. Then we also just looked at the pay structure, and we saw around pay grade J and up, which tends to be where our more upper management supervisor group is. That's right at that upper $80,000, $90,000 range. We thought that was a reasonable point to have a breaking point as well, and to recognize and provide a little additional support for folks that are on the lower end of our middle and lower end of our pay grades that are absorbing significant costs to get to and from work and other cost pressures. So that's kind of the final piece. We think this will be a strong way to implement it. We're pleased to be able to implement it all in one shot. Those of you that were here 5 years ago remember our original implementation at that time was 3 phases and 18 months. And the board sort of challenged us to say, we understand why you're doing that, but try to do it sooner. And we did move that up, got that done in 2 phases instead of 3. And this time we were able to do it all in one shot. I will tell you, it may not answer every little nuance of a pay issue in different departments. That's what I'll rely on department directors to identify, and we'll work through any of those issues. But by and large, it should allow us to adjust the pay ranges, which helps us on recruitment, adjust the existing pay, most importantly, for our team members, and give substantial increases, both in existing pay, but also a pathway for continued growth in their pay over a long period of time. So we think that will be very helpful. All right, I'll stop there and see if there's any other questions. I think I just got an email that told me what that number is for the $1,000. Do you want to go ahead and share that?
We, in preparing the budget, of course, we had to make some, probably some high estimates, but we considered that about 90% of our employees were less than $90,000. With some of the adjustments that Eric walked through, that percentage, there may be some people who get up to 90,000 that currently, aren't at 90, but I would think it still will be 75 to 80% of our employees will be affected by the $1,000 base pay increase. Does that sound
Thank you.
reasonable to you?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. We can get you an exact number, and some of it will be on how all that math works out, and some of that's based on evaluation scores.
It'll be after the,
Yeah, it's the last piece. We'll look at where
Got it.
everybody is after everything we did, and everybody's below 90, we're going to give another $1,000 bump. So the next slide will give you just an overview of just stepping back and looking at the general fund. We've weathered the challenges of the last 2 years. We're able to invest in our team with a full implementation and right at the outset of fiscal '23. We're continuing to invest in capital projects and moving those forward. We have a couple of the new positions help us do that more effectively. And you'll see in a couple slides here, our reserves are still in a very strong position, well in excess of your policies, and providing some capacity to help us do capital projects to pay as you go.
I might say to our new members, we are in extremely good position on reserves and have been, because that was one of the things when some of us got back in, that we said we wanted to make sure we had reserves if we had some bad years. And then we did have some bad years, didn't we?
It is a good safeguard, and like we said, it gave us great protection during the recession and when we had to make the changes with the uncertainty with COVID just 2 years ago, throughout the last 2 years. So it's important and does give us a strong protection.
So let me ask this along the same lines. Knowing what we learned from 2008 forward and knowing what our reserves are right now, with the uncertainty of where inflation is and how it is anticipated to continue to increase, do we feel like the reserves are in a very solid spot, or do they need to be shored up just a little bit more?
I feel very comfortable where we are. One of the things that we don't really have a slide on it, but it's in the budget document, is we do a 5-year outlook. So we sort of roll forward where we are in this budget. It's not good enough to just know that we can sustain what we have in this year that we're proposing to you. What does it look like over the next 4 years following? And we still end up, even with some pretty conservative estimates, at greater than 60% reserves at the end of that 5 years. So I think that's a pretty good test. I think that speaks to us having still pretty good stability overall, but a good protection if things do take a more significant turn. And I know there's fears around that. So I think that has served us well.
But the reserves are based on a percentage of the daily operations.
Yeah, on that general fund budget. So
So if,
that target grows with the budget.
yes. And we set the percentage several years ago. What, I don't remember, 40%, something like that.
It was 40%, and we got how much now, 60?
Well, 33 is your minimum.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
everything above 45% is eligible for programming for capital project
So
support.
basically 45.
So, yeah. So. All right, the next slide just gives you an overview of the revenue sources. We'll talk on the most important ones here in the next few slides, but you see how those numbers play out. Again, I'll break that down in more detail on the next slide. Let's go ahead and jump to that. This talks about local sales tax. Again, our bread and butter in that general fund. It is at 55.7 million. We are only projecting a 1% growth. That is intentional. We want to provide some safeguard because there has been so much growth in it over the last 2 years that we're a little worried there could be a correction. So we only planned on 1%. If I was doing it in a normal year, I'd probably put 3% in here. But we think with so much growth realized, we just may want to make sure we see that a little longer before we claim it. And so I think that's just it's a smart safeguard given how dramatic it's gone up in a short period of time. And so that sort of hides how much growth we've seen. That fourth bullet talks about how the base grew 30%, over 30% in 21, fiscal 21, and how that really, since fiscal 21, how that has been integrated into this number. You look at the budget we gave
Yeah.
you all a year ago, there's 20% more sales tax in this base budget now than there was a year ago, as we've seen that growth. Couple
Well, and we
reasons.
also need to say, again, many, many times, about that we were sharing the additional sales tax with the county schools up
Exactly.
until April.
Yeah, April of last year.
That's right.
And
But
so
still,
that
was
is part of
still-
what we've
yeah.
captured. That's part of that growth in the base, but there's been more. So that's a big part of it, half a percent, and the half of that 0.5% that comes to the city, we had given up for the first 3 years. That equated to just under $22.5 million to local schools that the city of Franklin provided. And we're glad to do it, but now it's returned to its normal path, which is to come to the city. Excuse me. But there is other growth,
And we
too.
should also say, there was a referendum on that,
Yes.
so, and as a part of the referendum, we had agreed to give our half to the schools for the 3 years.
And so the other elements we've seen is, just overall growth and inflationary pressures do show up in that revenue source. The state has done really enhanced their efforts on online sales tax collection, especially in the last 2 years. And we have seen consumers' purchasing patterns reflect that. And so all of those roll in together to drive a pretty strong growth here, and we'll continue to monitor this closely as it produces almost 59% of our main operating funds revenues. So the next slide shows you just sort of a comparison of property tax to sales tax, and you'll see sales tax is more than twice the level of what property tax produces. In your typical city, that would be reversed. Most places, property tax is 2 times that of sales tax, but we have an extremely robust local economy and a strong regional mall and a vibrant downtown that drives that sales tax up. So if we were in almost any other city in Tennessee, those would be reversed. But that's just the nature of Franklin's structure.
Even the other AAA ones.
That's absolutely true. So then the next slide just gives an overview of the other key revenue sources in the general fund. Again, the intergovernmental, which is really state-shared sales tax that comes back to us, that's at $15.5 million. And I don't know that that fully captures the new census number, so we might see a little bit of change there. So that's a 2.2% growth. Property tax is growing right at 3% overall. We do have some growth as we are paying ourselves back the loan that we made to the TIF district. And so those dollars are going to land in that area as well. The alcohol tax has continued to grow. Do you want to touch on that?
That's it, yeah.
So do you want to touch on it? Christine is much closer to it than I am, but it's been a good story to tell.
Well, just I'll try to run through a little bit of the history quickly, though. When the original TIF loan was issued, I believe it was in 2005, there, of course, right afterwards, there was some rough years, and there was an agreement between the city and the industrial board that issued the debt on the city's behalf, that the city would cover principal and interest payments if there was not property tax collection sufficient to pay that. and the city owes itself $2.2 million for advances on those principal and interest payments from the early years. Of course, that was extraordinary times, but eventually the district worked through that, and it became strong. And beginning actually in 2017, the property taxes within the district exceeded the debt service requirements, and this board started paying principal early on what had been a refinanced loan. And so that continued, and right after this current board was seated, one of your first actions was actually to use property taxes within the district to pay the loan off in its entirety. And we did that right before the new year. And so we do, for accounting reasons, we need to keep the TIF district open for one more fiscal year, because we do have to repay the general fund those monies, which it is a balance sheet item that we have to repay ourselves. And but the loan is gone. We don't have any more debt service, but we do have to repay the city's general fund. And then the next fiscal year, that property tax just becomes regular property tax that is accounted for just as any other property taxes paid in the city. So this is the accounting cleanup year in '23, and certainly the property taxes in the district have exceeded. We're actually going to be, when we close down this year, we will be less than $2.2 million, because we didn't need the entire amount of property taxes this year to pay off the loan. But when the finance department cleans up fiscal year '22, we'll have a new outstanding amount, because anything left over from '22 will repay the general fund, and then we'll repay the general fund in total in fiscal year '23, and then fiscal year '24, it'll be simple. Again.
And let's go back and say, the idea of a TIF district is that we bought the land.
The
or
land.
The land for Nissan North America to come, and we put a ring around it saying, if they come, then all those places around them are going to start developing and paying in property taxes. And so that's what the tax increment district is. And in fact, they have paid off the original money that we spent on buying the land and all of the debt and everything connected with it. So now, as soon as that's off, then as what we were just talking about here, is that all those property taxes that are going to pay this are now just going into our general fund. So, I mean, it's going to make a big difference.
It's a wonderful story. We
It is.
It sure is.
It
we
is.
certainly
It sure
just need,
is.
we're in the accounting, it's wonderful that the loan is paid off, and now we're in the accounting cleanup phase. But certainly it was incremental property taxes, so the land in that district had a value when the district was set, and then this is actually the increment between the growth. So it took growth in that district to have additional property taxes to repay the debt off, and that's what we'll be coming back in.
It was
So-
worth it. It was worth it.
This fiscal year pays that off.
This next fiscal year '23, the city repays the general fund back in its entirety.
And the slate is wiped clean.
And the TIF district then can go away. But we do have to pay the general fund back.
And then it becomes a general fund revenue source going forward, in your property tax.
Which is
So
substantial.
we've been dealing with it for 17 years now.
Something like that.
But it was,
What,
the
2005?
Industrial Development Board was right. It was definitely worth doing that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
As we see now.
And the fact that we've been able to pay it off.
And quicker.
And retire those years on the back end, especially in the last five
Well,
or
after,
six. So
after
that's
you
good news.
redid
Yeah.
some things.
That's right. So a couple other sources to just
Sorry,
touch on.
But that's long and important.
Alcohol tax continues to have kind of a steady growth. Building permits, we're showing just a 3% growth there. Grants do have a significant decrease. That's really based on the assumption we made around American Rescue Plan dollars. Christine talked about that in the budget amendments. Those now are going to be put directly towards the appropriate fund or department budget. So it's not going in one central place and then back out. It's going to go directly. So that's just a difference in how we're approaching that. And then you see interest income there as well. The next slide shows you our just kind of bottom line, and this gets at what Alderman Potts referenced, is those reserve numbers. Really, you look at the far right-hand side, that just under 75% in terms of where those reserves are projected out compared to the fiscal '23 budget, and over $70 million. So that gives us a significant cushion, but that's important as we still are in some uncertain times. There's still some things that we're not quite sure how they'll shake out over the long haul, and this does provide a safeguard. The next slide is the breakout by broader functional areas. This is what that pie chart sort of represented between public safety and the public works, governance areas, et cetera. Also the personnel, operations, and capital components. Those all just give you those exact numbers and those trends over the previous actuals and the previous budget and this proposed budget. The next is the pension one. We just talked about this. This gives you a 20-year overview of how those pension dollars, where they have been, where they are now. The fiscal '22 does reflect the proposed budget amendment. That additional $1.5 million that Christine talked about is included in that 7.6 in fiscal '22 that you see right there. Otherwise, we'd be pretty much flat over the last 3 years, or pretty consistent with one another. The TCRS plan, which is the open plan, is at 7.22% of salary. That did grow from about 5.9. TCRS changed their actuarial assumptions on investment return, dropped it 0.5%. So you have to make some adjustments in the contribution to help be part of the offset of that. But it's still significantly less as a percentage compared to the closed plan. And in total, all the pension commitments is about 12.2% of total payroll. All right, general appropriations out of the general fund. This is a breakdown of the outside entities. There is a jump here, the biggest piece of which is almost $60,000 increase in the animal control component that we support that provides
we
those
have to do that.
services across the city.
Just a sec.
Yeah.
Go back to the other, and I just want to point one thing out. If you look at 2010, you look at
Yes.
7.7,
Yes.
you're coming off of the 2008, 2009 recession, which dropped the estimated returns. And so we put in 7.7 million in 2010 to build that fund back up. That's the reason for the 7.7 and the tremendous jump that you see in there. That is the 2008, 2009 period that we went through. Sorry.
No, we did the bond issue in 2016 or 2015, yeah. 2010 was just an additional cash contribution.
We just did
because the fund was,
Russ recommended
there were
that.
some challenges there at that point, and we wanted to put some additional cash in it to stabilize it. And so the board was, I think, really wise in doing that, and we saw that help us over the next probably 4 or 5 years. And then we did pension bonds for a 10-year window that have helped bolster the fund as well. So there's been a number of initiatives. Let's go to the next slide, which talks about the appropriations, the outside agency funding. There is growth there. There's the almost 60,000 to animal control that I talked about. There is also kind of a one-time component with sister cities. We have a pretty significant visit from the delegation from our sister city in Germany, Bad Soden, coming this fall. That's approximately a $20,000 one-time to support that visit from their mayor and a significant group of folks from Bad Soden. They've hosted a couple different times of City of Franklin delegations, and so it's our turn to return that favor. There is the addition of 2 new funding elements. One generation away, there's a Franklin-focused food giveaway. That's a $5,000 support. And there's the Toussaint L'Ouverture Cemetery organization support for basic maintenance and mowing at that National Register Historic Cemetery. That totals about $32,400. That's a new component. We did provide a general 5% increase to the longstanding entities we provided support to, recognizing we're all facing some inflationary pressures. So that gives you a sense of that piece right there. The next slide just gives you an overview of where all the different funds are in your budget document. That's just a good reference point. I'm going to give you some highlights over the next probably 5 or 6 slides of some of the key operating funds. The next slide is just an overview of the all funds budget at $207 million and how that breaks out in personnel and operations, what it looks like in the general fund, personnel, operations, and capital, and then we jump into the different funds. Stormwater, there's no fee adjustment in stormwater. It's at $3.4 million as a total budget. There is some equipment replacement, I think around $170,000 within that budget number. Otherwise, it's supporting general maintenance operations. Sanitation, we touched on that. There's a $1.50 increase on the monthly fee for residential collections and residential collection and recycling services, moving that up to $22 a month. There is no general fund subsidy planned in this budget. That's 4 out of the last 5 budget years that have not had a general fund subsidy in it. So that's good progress as we push that to be a more self-sufficient fund. We did add 2 new positions related to community growth and service demands. We are replacing 3 side loaders. That's part of that equipment replacement fund. We are adding 2 side loaders to go with that expanded services. The 2 new pieces of equipment will be funded through the City Facilities Tax Fund. City Facilities Tax supports growth-related expenses, not personnel, but equipment and facilities for sanitation, for police and fire, and parks.
And it's not replacements, it's
Yeah, it can only be additions.
Additional, thank you.
It can only be
Thank you.
growth-related additions, and it cannot go for personnel. Hotel motel, as Christine referenced in the amendment, we've seen steady growth there. We've seen numbers, especially last month or 2, that have shown average daily room rates that are at or above pre-COVID levels. We've added some inventory in the last couple years despite the impact of the pandemic. Overall, there's 3 main ways that those dollars are spent. 1% of the 4% tax we put directly towards the Convention and Visitors Bureau and their support. Debt service, about $1.1 million. They're largely the acquisition costs, the bonds issued to acquire Harlansdale and Eastern Flank. And then capital investment project support of around $3 million. The development funds continue on. We're paying some debt service and direct project costs from those sources. We are in the process of updating the road impact fee. That will be coming before you at your next meeting, actually. So that'll get started at the tail end of this fiscal year and go into fiscal '23. We're due to look at those impact fees and update them. And then there are about just under $14 million of capital project support coming out of the development funds in this budget alone. So the impact fees, the facilities taxes are paying $13.9 million worth of capital project costs. Water and wastewater, you previously approved a 3% water rate increase and a 4% sewer increase. That'll go into effect January 1. The total fund budget is just over 42 million, 42.3, 17.3 of which is in water, 24.8 of which is in sanitary sewer, water reclamation, and then the reclaimed water system, that smaller system, is $224,000. We are now getting the full impact of the state revolving loan fund piece, the $119 million that was borrowed for the water reclamation facility. That's a 30-year debt in the 1% range, and so that is fully realized in this budget. We did restore 2 operator positions in water management. All right, and here's just the overview. We talked about this a little bit in the overview in the general fund, but it's true of all of our funds. We've emerged strong from the last couple years of uncertainty and disruption. We're in a good position, and we're in a position to be highly competitive, meet the service needs of our community, and be a place people choose to live and raise their families and build their businesses. We've supported in this budget a full implementation of the compensation plan update across the entire city team. We're delivering high-priority capital projects. We've added some staffing there to help us do that better, and we end the year with reserves in a strong place well above your policy levels. I want to take a quick word of thanks to our city team. This is absolutely a team effort. There are folks in every department that really work hard on putting this information together, putting their best foot forward to explain to you, to the community, what their service focus is. Our finance team does a great job. Michael Walters-Young, who's not with us today, helps lead that process. Angelique Franzoni helps provide a lot of support to our departments in this process as well. Our HR team plays a critical role as we look at all the positions. And like I said, representatives from every department, the leadership team, the assistant city administrators all pitch in, and it's absolutely a team effort, and I'm proud to present the budget to you today. So that ends it. I'll stop there. Glad to take any questions you have, and would ask you to move this on to the full board on the 24th of May.
Question, is Michael, is he in Hollywood doing a?
Yeah, he was contacted by, I think, CNBC about a
Thought maybe-
9 o'clock time slot.
I thought
Yeah,
maybe it
exactly.
was Walt Disney.
I can neither confirm nor deny that, so.
Okay.
Okay, you know, I had the one question I think that I sent ahead of time, on page 427 of our, it, you know, it has that, let me see why I didn't mark it here. Okay, on Appendix 8, on page 427, it's got the retiree contributions, and now it's got the TCS contributions also, CCRS, excuse me. But this means that basically the $5 million is coming out for the last 2 or 3 years, last year and this year, every year, just from our general fund.
Yeah, this
So-
is your the general fund contribution
That's
there.
right.
If they're water employees, the water fund is contributing.
Sure,
Yeah, sanitation, those areas where employees land is where that fund is responsible for those costs.
I
But,
get, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no,
Same question, I mean, on the same line of thought, we're also, so that was one question I had, it was $1.6 million decrease from the general fund over last year. Is that tied to the prepayment or what we're paying now, or out of this budget amendment, the 1.5 billion? There's a little-
Yeah, there's an additional contribution. I think that's reflected in
And
the
so you're
difference
just
there.
taking it out of the budget for next year because we're doing it now?
Well, no, we're not trying to advance. Actually, I don't believe that this document, this may have been printed before we had the additional amount, but we pay pension out of 4 different funds. So you have to actually combine the 4 different, there are 4 funds that we have people costs in. The largest is general fund, but we have water and sewer. We also have stormwater, has some people, as well as sanitation. So we do, you know, this line item by account, we do have to pay, we have to kind of go and aggregate.
And this is just the general fund portion.
Yes.
Did the pension was the pension committee aware of the additional 1.5 million when you made the recommendation for not to rehash anything from Tuesday night, but
No,
was
but-
the pension committee aware of the additional 1.5 million
I
don't
this
I
year?
don't know that we talked
We
about
got
that
to point
specifically.
yet.
I
Because
doubt
this is
it.
something as we looked at.
We
Simply,
didn't.
simply because the Pension and Trust Committee met several
A couple
months ago.
months ago.
oh, all right.
You
I see
know,
what
I
you
mean, again, not to rehash that, but
Yeah.
I don't
would have been
remember it.
helpful information. We're, experience a surplus, and Anyway, but that's the, but I did have that marked, so we are reducing the amount out of our general fund for that pension this year by $1.5 million.
I don't think that's totally accurate, because I think.
Maybe it's an incorrect print.
You've got the one-time component. We can pull that chart back up. It
It's on-
shows you.
well, the 427
It's relatively flat when you take the 1.5 million out. Pull that, yeah, that,
Which number
the
are we
blue, 24.
on?
So you've got 7.6 is what it's showing for 2022.
I'm just looking at the page 427.
Yeah.
The breakdown, and it has a $1.5 million reduction from the general fund to the,
That does include
Do you see that?
the 1.5,
Yeah, this does.
the 22, yeah.
Yeah, 22 does.
what
as
we're
well.
on the screen does.
Yeah.
Maybe this is an early
And,
printing.
yeah,
Page 427, fiscal '22, does include the additional 1.5 coming from general fund, which is an additional amount.
so if you,
And then '23,
It's $4 million.
that right there.
4.1.
That 4.1 is the general fund contribution for '23 in this proposed budget. But then when you look in line items of those other three funds that have people in them, that do have people in that closed plan, the total contribution for '23 is 5.1. Because that's the number from our actuary gave us as the required contribution for '23. And that's split between the four funds that have people in it.
So what I'm hearing, though, is the actuary said we could contribute less than in previous years.
when
And
you
that's
ro-
why
when
we
you
have a-
roll it all together, it's pretty much flat year to year. So we're gonna have to look.
We
I
can-
wanna,
we can
I wanna
take-
take you back through that, because I'm not sure that's the full reflection.
just wanna- I wanna
Because
get it.
it's pretty
Yeah.
much flat when you take out the 1.5 million that was done as a one-time this year.
Got it.
We put in what the actuary tells us to put in every year, based on where we are. And there are times we supplement it, and we're choosing or we're recommending
And I
to
want to
supplement
do
in
that.
22.
I think,
Yeah.
I guess I was more, and I think Alderman Peterson kind of saw the same thing, was that the fiscal '23 budget for the closed plan is and just one line item is the $4 million, and that is a $1.5 million reduction from the year before,
But for
and
fiscal,
prior years.
but for fiscal '23, which will be the new year, the proposed budget, just under 4.1, that's the general fund piece. But if we looked in those other three funds that have people, it also has closed pension
Well, no,
contributions.
but if you compare year over year on this one line item, it's the
That's right,
same
yeah.
thing there too. I mean, it's not like the prior budget
If you're
years,
looking-
you see
looking on
the 5.7, 5.6, 5 million, 3.6 in the prior years back to 2020. They also have the other funds as well.
And
You see what I'm
We've
saying?
done at least we did additional contributions
It's
a
not the
couple of
only time
years.
we've done it.
We've been doing additional contributions if we can.
So then the 4 million is, what I'm hearing you say, is probably more in line with what we should be doing, or is what the actuaries say. And the other prior years of the 5 point whatever, the 5.6, 5.7, that reflects those additional
Some
contributions in
additional
prior
contributions.
years.
Right, right.
Perfect. That's all I
But,
needed.
but
Yeah.
not enough to make up the difference for what you're saying, is it?
Not quite.
4.1 and 5.6, we didn't put $1.5 million extra.
Not last
What
year.
you've got in the 5.6 is your full funds and the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
What you've got there is general fund,
Yeah.
right? So that's not all that's going to be put into pension and trust committee or fund for the fiscal year 2020,
Right, that was what the
2023.
that's only a general fund line.
And the second thing is this, each year, the Pension and Trust Committee has voted, I'm sorry, not each year, to reduce the assumptions by 10 basis points. We want to get down to 6.5. So what, some of those numbers in there are some higher earnings and some projected earnings that are higher than what we're looking for and expect to get out of the fund. So you would have to, the actuaries would have to take that into consideration, I'm assuming, whenever they do the suggested amount to us. But the numbers that we put in are the numbers that the actuaries look at, and they look at the number of employees you got, the number that they're expected to retire in the next year, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is. And they go through those basic calculations to give us the number that we're looking at here. It's no advantage, there's no advantage to the city to put more than you need, unless there is concern in the future. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'd be a little bit concerned about 8.7% inflation that's running there now, and that's what we've got. And so far, I don't run scared, but I don't see a great deal of relief in the next few months over something like that. So, all the other night was interesting.
Well, I think the heart of the question is, we have a budgeted reduction in pension from the general fund.
Not paid.
We follow an actuary recommendation.
Understood, but I guess
And you're comparing it to a year that we made an additional 1.5 one-time contribution.
contribution. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I would back that out and then.
That makes
then
sense.
look at it, and it's a much
It's
closer
even.
discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more level. And I know there was some in '21 as well. When you look at 2020, you're at 3.6 million.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'd have to go back at '21.
Which sounds about normal.
Maybe a 500,000, I don't know, I don't remember. There was something in '21.
21 and 22. 21 and 22, we recommended to do additional. And of course, fiscal 2020 was the tough year that we actually essentially broke even. I believe we were $14,000 to the good in fiscal 2020, because that's when things fell apart on us the last few months of the fiscal year. So fiscal 2020, we couldn't ask to do anything extra because that was tough. We had sales tax that was giving us a tough time there. But 21 and 22, we did ask to put additional money into the closed pension. In the final budget amendment, when we knew the most information we could possibly know about revenues.
I just, at some point, not before we vote on any of this, not just today, but for this fiscal year, I'd like to get the number specifically about how many people are that are retired that are in the closed plan, and how many people that are in the closed plan that are still working. And just to get that, and then, as I say, just, and we've seen some of these numbers before, but I really haven't looked at them in terms of.
And they certainly are changing, because every year with the plan being closed, there's less actives, and we have more retirees. And
Now, did the actives still pay in?
only the ones,
Subset.
only the group that was hired between 2010 and 2016.
Yeah.
If they're still
Yeah,
active,
'cause
they're
everybody
paying
else didn't pay anything
their
yet.
5% contribution, but just the life cycle of the closed plan. Alderman Peterson's questions is a valid one, because, really all the time, that number is changing, because as people retire or resign that were on the closed plan, then we have less active employees, and then we also have, we could have more retirees, or we can have more people who are vested but not eligible for benefits yet, because they maybe left before they were eligible for benefits, and that's still part of what we have to be ready to fund when those times come.
Yeah, just like to hear, more about it, as I say, not before we pass this budget.
But no, we'd be glad to
give
get
you
that.
But still, since
I've
we're
seen those
talking about
numbers.
it, I think now.
No, we'd be glad to get that.
This is
Thank
why.
Mr. Chair, I have a lot of questions, but I will spare you all from having to listen. I will dig in some of these offline with our financial professionals. But I do have three. I do
Alderman
have.
Baggett, never let a good question go unanswered, okay?
Do you get to determine what's a good one and what's
And I
not?
determine what's a good one.
So on page 34, and this is something we've talked about a number of times, and it has to do with the additional 5%.
Are you on page 34 or slide 34?
Page 34 of the budget. It is also in our slide, or in the slides. I'm not sure what slide number it is. It's on 27 slide, capital. So, this 0.5% we get back. Half of it goes to capital and half to operating. It was kind of the, right, that's the, and I want to look at, historically, And we've been spending, let's just say, $2 million in capital out of the general fund, out of the general fund to capital.
Well, this capital is capital equipment. When we talk about the other capital, we're talking about capital projects.
This is capital equipment in the
This is,
budget.
yeah,
Good
equipment
point, good
replacement, that
point.
kind of stuff, technology. So this is operating capital. It is
Where-
not projects.
Where in the budget would one find the transfers of general funds to the to the CIP? Where,
Yeah.
That's a good point.
You've got it within your
Yeah.
transfers to other funds?
do we know, what page is that? Do you have a page number on there?
We'll have to track that down
It
for you.
might be on my page even.
And that's part of what we adjust when we adjust for the actual sales tax receipts.
So here's.
We adjust that transfer amount.
I want to make, and I know it's, well, unless there's a page number on it, I won't make it. We won't-
Yeah, I don't know that I can point you to one
Yeah, 'cause-
exactly right now, but.
That's all right, there's a lot of
we can give you
pages.
that. But we do
I'd like
transfer
to,
that
I'd like
money
to
out.
hone in on that,
Yep.
just because as we look at, if we were doing roughly $6-7 million a year to the county, and 7 million to the county.
Mhm.
And I want to, just want to make sure that I would like to follow that. so
We
that
can
we-
show you that transfer
Yes,
of roughly
show us that,
$3.5
yeah.
million.
Perfect. But this is the asterisk, is that the county's showing 25% year over year additional sales tax from when the 3 years where we were contributing
right,
that.
right.
So they're having the same sales tax increases.
Not anymore. They're
No,
not
no.
getting our money anymore, but they capture the same growth.
same growth.
Every dollar you get in local option sales tax, they get the same amount for public education.
Understood. The 3.5 million that we're assuming is that 0.5%
Mm-hmm.
though has increased by 25%. You can assume that that 0.5% has gone up, just like the county sales taxes have gone up. Receipts.
They're capturing the same number you get in that 0.5%, they're getting.
Understood, but they're getting 25% more like all the rest of us because of inflation or
I'm
whatever.
not sure what
we're-
25% is. They're capturing the same
Well,
growth
you-
we're getting in the base, they're getting in that number. So
We have seen an increase in sales tax receipts this year. Is all
Whatever
of-
that percentage
Is all of that from the 0.5%?
no.
Okay.
It is
so-
a combination
perfect.
of us capturing that and then the overall growth that we've had.
So the overall growth, I guess what I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
is the 3.5 assumption doesn't assume the overall growth piece.
And
that
we
you
will,
just-
and part of the amendment that Christine went through, there's some additional sales tax transfer in there because that number's been higher.
Okay.
We basically reconcile it based on the actual.
And at some
actual
point,
sales
it's all
tax, So
gonna,
more will go into the capital investment.
at some point, it's all gonna bleed together
Mm-hmm.
and you're not gonna be able to determine, but we have just seen a pretty stark,
Mm-hmm.
fiscal year where, you know what, that 0.5% probably is more than what we'd paid in the last 3 years, just because of this astronomical growth that we've seen in sales tax receipts. And so just want to make sure that that as much is going to capital as possible. The
Well,
other-
Right,
is
yeah.
that accurate? I mean, just because the city's up the amount that they're up, doesn't necessarily mean that Burwood had that kind of a increase in
The
sales
counties are
tax.
up
The counties are up.
by 25 roughly % per the finance committee at the county. And the state's up about
So
that
they're
much.
up the same amount? The
No,
same
we're up
percentage?
higher. We're up higher, I think, from the numbers I've seen. We're up significantly higher. But anyway, it's true. And the state is reporting they're capturing tens of 20% plus higher sales tax. So it is happening. But we can dig into those numbers later. And it's really not that big of a change, but this is a one time where we could say more of that money could go to capital. The other thing is on page 53 is something that is kind of concerning is the sales tax versus property tax mix. And I know we have a policy or a goal to get to a more stable. There's about a 10% increase.
Yeah.
I mean, $10 million roughly increase. Yeah, I mean, from these sales tax. And that's just it's scary. It's a bit scary. And I know that's why you have the 1% increase in sales tax, and that seems conservative. But this 20 on top, that's on top of the increase we've already seen. Just want to make sure we're not budgeting for, I mean, the growth that we've seen in sales tax receipts over the last 18, 24 months. I just don't want us to start budgeting for that and then, and it's not real. And you spoke to that earlier, and that's why there's a conservative 1%. But it has made our percentages on sales tax versus property tax significantly
Well, it's the
different.
two factors. It's the growth, and then you're capturing that full 0.5% that you didn't have
Both-
before.
both
You
of
now,
those.
so you've bolstered your sales tax even more. And that has been something we've identified over the years. When we did invest Franklin 6 years ago, that did actually make it a little better.
Yeah.
But sales tax grew from there, and then 4 years ago, we added a 0.5 cent of local option to help schools. And that now is helping us after the first 3 years.
And it's not it's just a concern.
You're right. That's
a
why we keep the
concern.
reserves in
Yeah.
place that we do, because we know we have an inherent of revenues. Our primary revenue source is one that inherently can change very quickly. If you're property tax based, it literally takes years
Consist-
for
yeah.
there to be an impact on a property tax. In sales tax, you can literally see it in a month or two.
Yeah.
And we know that, and we've lived it. And so that's why we have some of the safeguards we have in place. That's why we are trying to be a little extra conservative in the projections like you identified.
And that doesn't lead, those comments.
It's just where we are.
It's where we are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't lead to budget change or anything, but it does lead to the third point, Mr. Chairman, and then you can determine if my questions were were good. But is the projections on page 58 of the budget, and in 25 it showed start seeing a deficit. Fiscal year 25, 24, 25, I think it was.
Yeah, that's the 5-year outlook.
The 5-year outlook, yeah. So, and I think that is something the board needs to be aware of, if those are really the outlooks we have. I mean, and they may be conservative and based off this conservative budget, but certainly as we look at things and what we're spending and the volatility of what we're bringing in, it's not a big number of
Yeah,
a deficit.
it's something to keep an eye on.
But it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and we are pretty conservative. The range in that 5-year plan, as you look at page 58, is year 2, it's about 0.6% of a deficit. And at year 5, that grows to just 3.4%. So
Is that normal?
that's not a major concern to me, because I think that's just from a sensitivity standpoint in the grand scheme of things, that it's less than 3.5%, 5 years out, to me is not a major concern, but that's why we do the 5-year outlook, to say, is there a bigger problem out there? Or is there something we ought to be preparing for? This doesn't raise a flag to me, but it is something that we do and will continue to do, so that we aren't just focused on, things are fine this year, and then
And it
2 or
ties
3
back
or
to
4
the-
years from now, there's a bigger problem.
It ties back to the sales tax volatility and the mix, and
Yep.
that is only when I read through. I didn't read every word, but I looked at every page for sure. That definitely stuck out as kind of a macro thing. This board, I feel like, needs to be aware of, and I know you all are, but because it's not far away, and we need to be this
We're going to balance our budget.
period.
This just gives you a
Yeah, yeah,
sense
yeah.
of,
Understood.
of what that looks like and how big a lift that is. In my experience, I would say that doesn't concern me significantly, but we'll keep an eye on it, and we need to.
And the balance is still a lot more than our kind
You're
of
still,
rule.
yeah, almost double your
Yeah,
policy.
yeah.
So-
Our policy is.
Yeah.
It's 33%,
Yeah.
35%.
Yep.
And if I can just give just a little bit of comparison on that, we think it's important to do this, to have this in our minds, but even in the budget cleanup amendment that we talked about a little while ago, we're actually reducing in general fund, where we have projected under expense this year of $889,000, where we knew we had positions that weren't filled and we had supplies we couldn't get. And so your finance staff is working with departments, and that is the nature of government budgets, that we do look, and not only look for places that we are concerned that they may spend more, but we also look at places where they're spending less, and we do make those adjustments. And because we're not allowed to exceed budgets by state law, we have to actually stay within our appropriations. That that does make this analysis pretty conservative. So, and this 889,000 isn't the only under expense we expect, but we knew enough about what was going into the final amendment to project under expense of $889,000 in the general fund, and we put that into the final cleanup amendment. So it is something that, such as in the forecast in '24, we want to know what this forecast number is, but we also are going to keep up with what's going on, but with a potential under expense and places that we may be really, the staff be concerned about, something happen.
Thank you.
If I was concerned about the fund balance, I might look at more than 45% being the cutoff as far as spending. You can raise it to 50. It's a board decision. Okay? I mean, you could raise the 35 to 40 and then make the cutoff at 50, so you'd have 50% fund balance if that was a concern. And I can tell you, I may have not said too much, but I think there's a concern about where we are and where we're going as far as, and again, you just can't, inflation, I guess, what was 8.7% last month? 8 point something other the month before. Those are not good numbers. And when we sit here and listen to, I can't name it, the guy, the pension and trust guy?
Michael?
No,
Yeah.
no.
And he goes over that and over that. It may give you a warm, but it doesn't give you a warm and cozy.
That was the TCRS investment
Yes.
manager that came, talked about the economy.
Any, let's see, any other questions on item 3? Then let's do a motion to approve item 3, draft ordinance 2022-12, with the following caveat that it be recommended to the full board for review and approval.
I move that we recommend it to the full board for review and approval.
Proper motion, is there a second?
Second.
All right, Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go then to item 4, which is consideration of draft ordinance 2022-13, an ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, establishing the municipal property tax levy for the fiscal year 2022-2023, providing an effective date. Christine, you gonna cover
I
that?
can just address this.
Just
We
the
do have a separate ordinance to establish the property tax rate. This rate that's approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen does get delivered to the county trustee, Karen Paris's office. Her office does bill that for us. The ordinance currently is in draft form. It's under review by our law department, but it does maintain the city administrator's proposed rate of 32.61 cents. And that's what this draft ordinance that we asked for your consideration. And it will be reviewed and finalized by the law department before first reading at the end of the month.
Any questions of the property tax rate? Then I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
And is there a second?
Second.
Proper motion is second to be forwarded to the full board. Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. Let's go to item 5, then, consideration of draft ordinance 2022-14, an ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, to amend Appendix A, comprehensive fees and penalties, Chapter 17, refuge and trash disposal of the Franklin Municipal Code, to increase the fees for collection of garbage and refuge. Any questions?
No.
Anybody?
That's the $1.50
That's
from
the dollar.
$20.50 to $22 per month.
Sure.
Would you remind me, what do we think our expected increase is going to be annually?
Well, one of the things we've charged the team to do is to do a 5-year rate plan like you have in water and sewer, so you can look at that. We did a cost of service analysis probably 2.5 years ago, and it was somewhere in that mid-20s that we thought was the full recovery cost when you roll equipment and all that in. So we'll refresh that, and that'll be our basis. We like to keep it manageable over time.
Because everybody pays this.
We are doing a far better job than we used to. It used to be heavily subsidized, and now it's largely not. There are occasional years we have to supplement it to make sure we're at the right reserve level, or something comes up beyond our normal planning. So we're really fairly close, but that analysis will give us a better answer to that. We're not that far away.
Several million subsidy.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We have discussion on that. Does anyone wish to make a motion on approval of ordinance 2022-14?
I recommend that we recommend approval to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. on
All
this
right,
item.
proper motion to a second.
Second.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to item 6, consideration of draft ordinance 2022-34, resolution of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for the city of Franklin adopting the estimate of revenue and expenditures for the water and sanitary sewer utility fund for fiscal year 2022-2023 and providing an effective date.
And this is just your estimate of revenues and expenses, as it says. The fee adjustment has already been approved, so it's already in place. This just provides a mechanism to show your overall budget for the utility.
And
Embarrassing when you duck goes off. Isn't it?
Is there a duck in here?
Just remind.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move for approval for review and approval from the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Okay, a proper motion to a second.
Oh, second.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's do the monthly reports for May 2022. Margaret, you want to do those?
Yes, I am.
All right. Well, now, you saw what happened, if you know how we practiced on these and what a great job our counterpart did on that as far as the film is concerned. Now, you can use this as a stage to practice with.
No, that's okay. I do have a few notes, but I think you've already heard everything, so.
Yeah.
All right.
But yes, as you've heard, sales tax. We're at 11 consecutive months of over $4 million in the sales tax, so of course it's still staying strong. I did want to also point out gasoline tax. We're at 235,000 higher than last year, so that one is also strong. Once again, as mentioned earlier, hotel motel, we're 112% higher than this time last year. So you can see it coming back, and if you like traffic, then you can see that too. The conference center, they did have a strong report in March. They showed a profit. They had many individual group businesses come in, fewer cancellations, and they're actually looking toward an April being strong as well. And last but not least, right now, the preliminary general fund surplus is $12.6 million. So that's as of February 2022. And as Christine's mentioned, we will get those numbers finalized toward July, August, September, and then auditors will come in and give you the final number, usually in December.
And thank you, Margaret, for this report. And this report, and as we've been watching this along the way, is part of, as we worked with Eric on the final budget ordinance and his proposal to establish the capital project fund for vehicle replacement, additional monies for that closed pension. It's because of projections for this types of reserve, additions to reserves. So if that amendment is approved by the full board, that will be reducing potential increases to fund balance that the comptroller has been reporting here for the last few months. So we take this information and pull it together with needs and work with the city administrator to make a recommendation that he approves of. So that right there is an indication of why we were asking to put some additional monies into those reserve funds.
Mike, do you have anything to add? All right. Any questions or comments? Anything else to come before the committee? Looking around, the audience is full, there's no questions from the audience. Then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, sir.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.